And here to take stock of the latest data and what it might mean about political strategies to come, Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. She is in Toronto today, and Christian Bourque is executive vice president, senior partner at Léger. He is in Montreal. Christian, let me start with you. The takeaway from your numbers at Léger.
Numbers that just came out this week, 40% for the Conservatives after distribution of the undecideds versus 26% for the Liberal Party, which is basically the same numbers we've had now for the past 3 months. So we saw a big sort of surge of support for the Conservatives since May and up until August. And now the trend has sort of flattened out at about 40 to 26, which seems to be fairly constant over the past 8 weeks.
Shachi, we saw your numbers as well. Your read, your takeaway of what they mean.
Well, it means that the Liberal strategists who were perhaps dreaming of sugar plums this Christmas are instead going to get some lumps of coal. Look, the Liberals are not just trailing the Conservatives now. They're trailing the Conservatives quite badly. The Conservatives are now, if an election were held in the very near term, in striking distance of majority territory, or frankly at 40-41% in majority territory. Here's the thing that saves the Liberals in the short to medium term. We don't expect to see an election anytime soon, so they're going to hope that those numbers are not terminal, that trailing the opposition Conservatives by more than 10 points is not going to be something that stays static, that they can find a way to get a bump. And in order to do that, we have to see, number one, the cost of living crisis start to ease and dissipate, because that's what's been driving so much of that Conservative support that Christian talked about since May. Also, they've really got to start getting much more focused and far less scrambly in terms of the way they are approaching the Conservatives. They need to start, attacking like they mean it. We haven't seen that happen.
Yeah, Christian, there is this narrative or perception, whether it's fair or unfair, that this is a tired federal government. It's out of touch and out of steam. Based on your numbers, talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges the government's facing right now. Yeah,
well, in Canada, in recent history, 8 to 10 years is about end of regime as it comes. So there is that sort of sentiment of this end of regime happening in Ottawa. What we're seeing, though, as well, is that on the Conservative side, there still are or needs to be some concerns. As soon as they move towards that 40% mark in terms of voting intentions, now they need to convince people who are not necessarily individuals that would consider the Conservatives under normal terms. And the best way for them to do that is to get better acceptance for their leader, Pierre Poilievre. When we ask who would make the best Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Poilievre is only at 25%, far behind his voting intentions. So there's a lot of convincing yet to be done. So if there is no election in the short to midterm, it also needs to help Mr. Poilievre establish himself not as the leader of the Conservatives, but as the next Prime Minister. And we've seen it with a change of strategy, the sort of I'm not so scary with, dealing away with the glasses, the common sense approach to appear more approachable and likable. But there still is a lot of ground to make up in terms of Canadians and more Canadians accepting Mr. Poilievre as potentially our next Prime Minister.
And Shachi, this idea that the government is disconnected from Canadians, doesn't understand the challenges they're facing, how much of a challenge is that for them?
The fatigue factor and the fact that this is a government that hasn't had a lot really left in the tank to answer or communicate to Canadians through what has been, for so many Canadian households, the most painful time they've experienced in a generation. Rent going up, mortgage, not only mortgage rates going up, but in practical terms now, if you're on a variable mortgage or if you've gone to renew your mortgage, this is a time of great pain. About half of Canadians, according to our own data, are having trouble meeting their own grocery bill. And against the backdrop of that, yes, there have been some targeted ways that the Liberal Liberals have tried to provide some relief, particularly for lower income earners. But at the top of the pyramid, you have a prime minister who, through no fault of his own, it's not a personal attack, but cannot really communicate authentically about what it means to have to make ends meet or be financially squeezed, because, you know, it's just not his reality. It's the same thing for the finance minister, who's the MP for Rosedale, one of the most wealthy ridings in the country. As a result, you know, you've got a situation wherein the Liberals don't have a lot of authentic communicators to be able to say, hey, Canadians, we feel your pain. And if they do have authentic communicators within the ranks of their own caucus, they're not putting those people forward. You know, we saw a cabinet shuffle earlier during the summer that was supposed to be this new, refreshed face on this government. But with a few exceptions here and there, we've seen almost nothing from a lot of these new ministers, new junior ministers, who probably would have some fairly cohesive or persuasive things to say, because they are younger, they are from communities that may not you know, immigrant communities, in many cases first and second generation immigrants have had a little bit more economic struggle than others. All of those things could be things that they could use to speak to Canadians about what they're experiencing, and we're just not hearing it.
Christian, so much of the Liberal brand is tied to Justin Trudeau personally. Is that strategy now hurting them? And if so, how do you fight that unless you get rid of Trudeau?
And that's the question. I mean, going back to the 2019 election, we said, oh, Trudeau is weak. He's the greatest liability for the Liberal Party. He won. Last time around, we said he's the greatest liability for that party. He won again. So it's very hard to actually see or find a way that this time around he would want to step aside or he should step aside. The other aspect to this as well is when we look at the data overall, right now, name me a single incumbent government that's doing well in the polls, because people are angry, whether it's, you know, in the United States, Biden is struggling. And if we look at the popularity of our Canadian premiers in the different provinces, Mr. Legault here is actually sort of tumbling downwards in the polls as well. It's not a great time to be in power because, as Sachi mentioned, people are genuinely angry because things are not going their way. We're facing a situation we haven't faced for a lot of millennials and Gen Zs have never actually faced in their lifetime. And of course, at some point, you need to take it out on somebody. And right now, all incumbent governments are suffering. And it's leading to elections or surprise elections like we just saw in Argentina with the new prime minister or president of Argentina, who's by all means a demagogue, but he managed to pull through because people just want to change.
Christian, if I can stay with you, just a question about Quebec. We know the Conservatives making a big push for voters there. Pierre Poilievre basically starts every speech nowadays in French, and yet he still has an uphill battle in that province.
Yeah, well, he could have told that to one of his members of parliament yesterday as well, to be more careful. But in the province here, they're not yet in that sort of pay zone. As soon as they reach about 25%, and as soon as the Bloc Québécois falls under 30 or close to 30%, that's where the Conservatives will be actually looking at seat gains. The problem is that the Bloc Québécois, being so unpopular on the island of Montreal, they get all of their votes in French-speaking ridings off the island of Montreal. And right now, the Bloc Québécois is still too strong in those ridings. So they're not there yet, but they have improved, though, over the past 6 months in the province. And probably the reason why he is putting more emphasis on the province, because now it looks like it's possible. Not there yet, but possible.
Last one to you, Sachi, if I can ask you this, just about 30 seconds or so. Is it time for the Liberals to consider getting rid of Justin Trudeau?
And replace with who? That is the question. We've done some testing on this in our polling. And, you know, the names that people like to bandy about, the insiders, Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, Mélanie Joly, Minister Champagne, none of these people are eliciting much enthusiasm or excitement among Canadians. Most have never heard of these folks. So at this stage, you mentioned, the Liberal brand is the Trudeau brand. Rebranding in a short amount of time with somebody who is unknown, maybe not very exciting, whose negative ratings are way higher than their positive ratings or their unknown ratings. These are all challenges. So for now, I would suspect, especially as the Prime Minister says he's not going anywhere, he's going to dance one more dance in a coming election.
Shashi Curl with Angus Reid joining us from Toronto, and Christian Bourque from Léger joining us from Montreal. Thanks so much for your time. Great to have you on Power Play today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.